Good morning, it's Tuesday. Welcome to Saba's Way of Life. So today's a bit of a random talk, and let me share some thoughts that came into my mind this morning. Funnily enough, last night I had some really vivid dreams, which is great, and I wrote them down this morning. Now, this morning I was reading through some information that came in on my device. I'm always looking at learning information, and there's a select few people that I choose to follow. Never have any notifications. I don't want anything notifying me. Only exception are one or two people whose voices and minds I respect hugely, and I want to watch. But generally I don't. So I then go and seek those voices to see what they may have been saying. And as you may have seen all over the internet, and even this morning when I was at my mother's and she was watching breakfast television, everyone's talking about this solar eclipse, I think it is, solar eclipse. Now, I'm just going to share with you how I've absorbed that information, which wasn't the same some years back, because I would have been completely engaged in all the mass hype about this solar eclipse, which is all done by design again. And but now it's a completely different story, and I'm not suggesting that I'm right, nor am I suggesting I'm wrong, because there isn't a right or wrong. It just is what it is. So first and foremost, I was completely aware that there was a solar eclipse coming on the 8th, because you can't help but be aware and notice it. Secondly, the other reason I was aware is I'm a biodynamic gardener. By that I mean I garden using the principles of Rudolf Steiner, who I respect very much. I've talked about him in many videos. And therefore, on my biodynamic lunar calendar, any events that take place are on the calendar. Now, here's the important point. On the lunar calendar, there are days that are greyed out, greyed as in the shade grey, because they're not suitable days to work in the garden on sensitive gardening, like sowing seeds or transplanting. And that always happens around a full moon and always happens around lunar events, because from a cosmological, astronomical, even astrological perspective, there's a lot of chaos going on around those times. Anything where the moon influences the earth, and it's best just to stay away and just observe and just stay away. So I had already greyed out those days, and I tend to, this is every month, what I tend to do is on those greyed out days, I tend not to go in the garden unless it's a lovely day, and then I sit down quietly. I tend to read. I tend to spend a lot of time in reflection. I tend to spend a lot of time pondering. These days I read the Qur'an, or I'm just generally very quiet. The other thing that's happened over the last few days, and I'm explaining this to you so that you yourself might realize how to harness your own intelligence rather than be influenced by anything else, whether it's right or wrong. Whatever's coming inside you, which will be different to me, is the right thing to do. But it's important that intelligence that comes to you stems from the right source. That's the key, and that only happens over time in the way you act and what you do each and every day, right? So the last few days I've not even wanted to eat. I'm not fasting at this stage, but I ate. I just wasn't hungry, so I didn't eat. End of. I didn't eat very much. Hardly ate anything because I wasn't hungry. And just spent quiet time. Now, this morning I was looking at a piece of writing by somebody called Bernard Guenther. I think he's German or Austrian again. And there's a lot of, I found him on Twitter, but I've actually saved his website. And I like some of the things he says. Not everything. I don't coincide with all his writings, but he writes long form, and there's a lot of information in there. I think that's interesting. That's interesting. Maybe I'll look that up. That's interesting. I like to ponder on that. How does that have an effect on my life? What about everything I've learned? How does that fit into what I've learned? That's how I ponder things. And I was reading something this morning that he'd written a podcast, I think it was, on this eclipse that was coming. And it was a very lengthy podcast and talked a lot about information on what the ancients used to do when there was an eclipse and so on. And it made complete sense. I'm always interested to hear what the ancients did, but I'm always also very dubious and critiquing of the source from which that information comes. So this is something to do with, I can't remember which ancients. It's not that relevant, to be honest. But every time that there is an eclipse, they stay away. It's not a good thing. It's a warning. It's an evil thing. Now, for me, it's common sense. Here's the common sense. They stay away and they all stay at home indoors quietly and shut their curtains. And so very dramatic. There may be a lot of truth in it, but here's the thing. It's very clear to me that when the sun is a source of energy, we cannot survive without the sun. How do I know this? I've read a lot, but I feel it when I go out in the garden and the sun is out. I'm energized. It's like a battery recharging. I've had days where I'm sitting in the garden. It's not too hot in the UK. The sun is never too hot, even at its highest point, midday, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. And I can just sit there and face the sun, not look at it, but face it, and just close my eyes, and it's the most wonderful experience. I feel this light just going straight into my head. Here, third eye, not third eye, who cares? It just goes, I feel it going into my head here, and it just feels beautiful. Sometimes I even fall asleep. So it stands to reason when there is an eclipse, and even if you can see it or not see it, and the moon covers the sun, it probably isn't such a good thing. And I'm saying that simply because I understand biodynamic gardening. I understand, having read the Qur'an, how the sun and moon move around the earth, and neither of them get in each other's way. There's a verse in the Qur'an, I'm going to find it and share it down below. None of them get in each other's way. So when something unique happens like that, there must be some kind of cosmological impact. But really, I want to get out of the way of that and just sit quietly and perhaps devote my time to the divine, or to my maker, or to the creator. That is common sense. It's actually quietening the mind and reflecting. And that's what I did even prior to reading any of that, because it just came into me, obviously, from within, but also having the knowledge from outside over a period of years. And this is what I want to get you all to really think about, that stop. I can't repeat this enough. You know, there may be all sorts of things that happen as a result of the solar or lunar eclipse. I'm sure they do, and I'm sure there's all sorts of weird things that the establishment elite do, and rituals and whatever they do. But I'm not interested. I'm aware, but I'm going to sit and become close to my maker. That is it. Because whatever is supposed to come in, whatever insights I'm meant to have or not have, I trust myself and I trust God, and they'll come into me anyway, and I'll act upon them. There are 3 or 4 things yesterday that came to me without the knowledge was there of the eclipse, but it wasn't in my head because I was busy doing other things. But they did come to me, and there are things I'm going to act upon, which I was going to anyway. So you could call that synchronicity, you can call that what you wish. That's what I wanted to share. Start learning to trust yourself. And it seems like such an obvious thing I'm saying, and it's so simple and obvious, but no one does it. Very few people do. Or people might say it, but they don't do it. What action are you going to take? Right now, I'm going straight up to my little office and I'm taking action on the things that came to my head yesterday. Not because of any eclipse or anything like that, but because they came into my mind. They were very impactful. They were very synchronistic and coincidental, because nothing is a coincidence. You could call it esoteric, mysticism, and we've all got it, and I'm going to act upon it. And it will there are some massive changes about to take place in my personal life. There may be in yours, there may not be. But that's how I am. I accept what comes and I go, because that's what we are as human beings. It's nothing magical or mystical in the mainstream sense. It's mystical in the very grounded sense that we are human beings, and those are the innate abilities that we've got when we link to who we are. And the last thing I want to talk about is reading. Reading is so important. All this thing we don't read, you need to read. The first thing that came to my mind just recently about reading is that obviously be very diligent about what you read. That's very important. Be very discerning. But of course, if you think about the scripture that came down through God, it was inscribed onto a book, put on parchments for people to read, or those people that couldn't read, the honest among them that were able to read, to recite it to them and explain it to them. Of course, it all fell into the wrong hands. But now we're in a society today in the Western world where everybody should be able to read. Actually, arguably, it's not even true anymore. They can't even understand, and their diction they have very narrow bandwidth of words to understand in the simplified, dumbed down English language that it is. But nonetheless, if you can read. And that's what I'm going to be spending a few hours today doing before carrying on with some important cooking. That's my input for today. Have a lovely Tuesday.